Hello and welcome to the session on philosophical skepticism and its contribution to the development of intentionality. Introducing the skeptical approach to perception. In the previous unit, we engaged with Aristotle's theory of perception. According to Aristotle, in perception, the mind receives the form of the object perceived without its matter. He asserted that being an object of thought and being existence are two entirely different things. For him, the former does not imply the latter. To put it in simple terms, the form of a perceived object is taken into the mind of the perceiver without the matter of this object. Now, this view of perception throws up an interesting question. What or which is the real object of perception? Is it the object in the external world, or is it the form of the object in the mind of the perceiver? The skeptics of antiquity believed that the real object of perception was the form of the object in the mind of the perceiver. The skepticism of antiquity was an intellectual tradition of the Greek and Roman civilizations like Stoicism and Epicureanism. Its founder, Pyrrho, accompanied Alexander the Great on his famous military expedition to India. The last of the major skeptics, Sextus Empiricus, lived well into the 3rd century AD. Sextus Empiricus was a physician and a philosopher who lived in Alexandria and Athens in the 3rd century AD. His work is the only surviving account of Greek and Roman skeptical thought that is almost complete. Empiricus asserts that skepticism is an ability or mental attitude which is based on the fundamental principle of distinction between appearances and judgments. Appearances for him meant sense perceptions which he contrasted with the objects of thought or judgments. Skeptics argue that we cannot know things in themselves, we can only know their appearances. We can be sure that we see a car in the next street or that there seems to be a car in the next street, but we cannot really be sure whether there really is a car. He is stating that we cannot have knowledge of a car in itself, of a car as a physical object existing in the real world. To put it differently, we can be sure of the existence of the mental act and its content, but not of the object to which it is directed. Therefore, it is only appearances or mental pictures that are the objects of knowledge. We cannot know objects that exist outside of perception. In his view, there is a lack of harmony between the object of appearance and its reality. The skeptical theory of perception was in sharp contrast to Aquinas' notions of perception. Aquinas stated that we do not perceive our own ideas, but rather external objects through our ideas. The idea, the mental picture, the image is not the object of perception, but the means of perception. In other words, they are instruments that the mind uses to perceive objects existing in the real world. The 10 tropes. The ancient skeptics developed numerous arguments to deny the possibility of knowledge, but Empiricus was not as radical as the earlier skeptics. He never stated that knowledge is impossible. He only said that since we can never conclude about any object, we perceive that we are perceiving it as it actually exists. We should not claim to know the real nature of the world. That is, we must suspend our judgment about the real nature of the world. The reasons as to why we must refrain from making judgments about the world is given in the 10 tropes or modes in book 1 of Empiricus, Outlines of Pyrrhonism. The 10 tropes are believed to have been originally enumerated by Anaximus, who lived in the 1st century BC in Alexandria. In this module, we will discuss the 10 tropes or modes as they have been revived and discussed in detail by Empiricus. The tropes begin with a discussion on the variety of life in terms of animal species and how such variety implies different responses to the same object or phenomena. Different living beings, including men and animals, receive different impressions from the same objects. This is because of the differences in their origins as living beings on the one hand and differences in bodily structures on the other. Trope 2 emphasizes the difference in human beings as determining the ways in which they receive impressions and respond to them. This trope states that the impressions different individuals or human beings only receive of the world are reflected in the variations to their responses to things. When some men choose things that are avoided by others, we must conclude that they are differently affected by the same things. Given these differences among human beings, we must not select the impressions of certain individuals and claim that these represent the world as it is as against the impressions of others. In other words, some men's impressions of the world should not be raised to the status of truth. The third trope states that since a single individual can have different sense impressions of the same thing, none of them can give him or her a true picture of or total knowledge of the object. We can look at an ice cream cone, smell it and taste it. To look at it may be white, to smell it may have the flavor of vanilla, and to taste it may seem sweet. Which of these sense impressions gives us a true picture of the ice cream? We cannot say. The fourth trope states that the nature of impressions we receive depends on our physical condition and our state of mind at the time of reception. For example, the same room would appear differently to somebody who is drunk and to another who is sober. Likewise, we cannot draw a distinction between the world as perceived by normal people and the world as perceived by abnormal people or people with streaks or insanity. We cannot say that the world perceived by normal people is the real world, because for the abnormal people it is the normal people who are abnormal and not they themselves. We do not have any acceptable standards or benchmarks for normality. Therefore, we cannot conclude that anyone's impressions reveal the world as it really is. In the fifth trope, Empiricus observes that the appearances of the objects we perceive vary according to the nature of the circumstances of these objects and their relationships to us. Thus, the same ship seen at a distance seems small and stationary, but large and moving when viewed from a closer position. The necks of doves appear in different colors when we view them from different angles. The handle of a spoon, which appears straight, otherwise looks bent when placed in a glass of water. Empiricus, drawing from all these examples, writes that while we can state the nature which each object appears to possess as viewed in a certain position or at a certain distance or in a certain place, we are unable to conclude what its real nature is because of these reasons. In trope 6, Empiricus asserts that no object appears to us in isolation. An object always appears to us in a surrounding medium which affects its appearance. Thus, the color of a person's complexion varies with the temperature. If we go out in the sun, our face looks red or brown. If we stand in a room full of bright white light, we look lighter. The intensity of a sound in nature, say bird call for instance, varies with the direction and speed of the wind or the density of the atmosphere. Moreover, our sense organs do not function in isolation. Our vision is affected by membranes and fluids in the eye, our sense of taste by saliva in the mouth, etc. We are unable to know any object in itself by means of one sense organ alone, simply because neither does an object exist in isolation nor do our sense organs function in isolation. Trope 7 states that the appearances of external objects vary according to whether they are perceived discretely or in detached separate parts or in the aggregate as one single whole. Thus, a goat's horn viewed as a single whole looks black, but the same goat's horn fillings look white. Similarly, a block of silver looks white, but silver fillings look black. The question then is, what is the real color of goat's horn and silver? Empiricus says we can never say. Trope 8 points out the fact of relativity. Empiricus writes, to know an object as it truly is, one must apprehend it in its own terms and not as it is in relation to anything else. However, since we perceive all objects only in relation to others, we must bring them into relation with ourselves as perceivers. Since we have established that all things are relative, we are left with only one conclusion. The conclusion goes thus: we shall not be able to state what is the nature of each of the object in its own real purity, but only what nature it appears to possess in its relative character. Hence, we must suspend judgment concerning the real nature of all objects. The ninth trope underlines the significance of the frequency or rarity of occurrence of an appearance in our response to it. We take for granted or hardly respond consciously to phenomena that occur on an everyday basis. For example, we hardly notice the sun, whose rising and setting is an everyday phenomenon. However, everyone is amazed or awe-stricken at the passage of a comet, which may happen once in 75 or 100 years, even though the passage of the comet is not so remarkable a phenomenon as the rising of the sun. It is not remarkable because its duration does not last longer than a couple of minutes, or as seen from a point on the earth, and it has no impact on the functioning of the earth and life itself. Hence, our responses to such phenomena are not appropriate to the objects as they really are. Instead, our responses to phenomena depend on the frequency with which they appear to us. The 10th trope stresses the role of customs and laws, of cultural practices, legendary beliefs and dogmatic convictions in our responses to phenomena and objects in everyday life. In other words, Empiricus affirms the part played by these in shaping our conduct and ethics as individuals and societies. This trope differs from the previous ones in being concerned with conduct and ethics, which are factors other than our sense impressions. It is concerned with ethics which for Empiricus are relative and differ from society to society and individual to individual. In one society, a certain type of conduct is accepted, but in another it may be condemned. Therefore, an individual who performs a particular act can be normal individual in one society, but a criminal in another. Instances of such conduct are found in practices such as homosexuality, human sacrifice, adultery, incest, homicide, etc. According to Empiricus, these opposed beliefs about appropriate forms of conduct indicate a lack of agreement on the nature of objects. Given the stark differences, we cannot form a reasonable judgment as to the true nature of the objects and appearances involved. We shall not be able to state what character belongs to the object in respect of its real essence, but only what belongs to it in respect of particular rules of conduct, law, habit, etc. British empiricism and the skeptical tradition. The British empiricists of the 17th and 18th centuries like David Hume, John Locke and George Berkeley carried on the skeptical tradition. They argued, following Descartes, that the mind can never go beyond itself and that man is directly aware of his own ideas only, not of the objects in the external world. For them, ideas are the only objects of certain knowledge. What goes beyond them is only a matter of uncertain inference and conjecture. David Hume remarks that men blindly follow their senses. They, without any reasoning, always suppose an external universe which depends not on their perception, but as existing independent of all living and perceiving beings. It is because they blindly follow their senses that they take the images or presented by the senses to be the real objects. Thomas Reid, who was a contemporary of Hume's and belonged to the school of skeptics, however, argued differently and took Hume's ideas a step ahead. He believed that the weakness of skepticism and empiricism becomes obvious as soon as we ask what ideas really are. Are they mental acts or operation as Reid calls them, or are they objects of those acts? Reid acknowledges the existence of two kinds of ideas. Ideas for him mean the acts or operations of our mind in perceiving, remembering or imagining objects. They also include objects of those perceptions. They are not perception, remembrance or conception, but things that are said to be perceived or remembered or imagined. He asserts that beside mental acts, there also exist intramental and extramental objects. The extramental objects are real objects existing in the world, and intramental objects are immediate objects of perception in the mind itself. We may not see the sun when we talk about it, but we have an idea or impression of the sun in our own minds. This idea is said to be the picture, the resemblance of the sun, if there exists a sun. This picture is what is known as the intramental object, while the other empiricists confuse two senses of idea, namely as mental act or operation and as intramental object of mental act. Reid clearly distinguishes between the two. Along with this distinction, he also distinguishes between perception and consciousness. Perception, he argues, is directed to extramental objects, but consciousness is directed to our mental acts themselves. Perception is applied only to eternal objects, not to those that are in the mind itself. Consciousness is only of things in the mind and not of external things. Therefore, we do not perceive ideas in our minds in the same way as we perceive a car or the sun. Reid and the problem of non-existent objects. The question that follows from Reid's theory is whether this distinction can be made in the case of acts having non-existent objects. For instance, is it possible to distinguish in our imagination of a unicorn between the act of imagination and the object imagined? Reid affirms that it is possible. I conceive a unicorn. This conception is an operation of the mind of which I am conscious. The sole object of it is a unicorn, an animal which I believe never existed. I can see no contradiction in this. The philosopher says, I cannot conceive a unicorn without having an idea of it in my mind. Perhaps he will say that the idea is an image of the animal and is the immediate object of my conception, and that the animal itself is the remote object. To this, Reid says, there are no two objects of conception, but only one. This is as immediate an object of conception as any can be. He adds that this one object that is conceived is not the image of an animal, it is an animal. Conception or imagination belongs to those mental acts which in Reid's view have an object. The object is not any mental image or picture. Therefore, it must be a real thing in the external world. But the act of conceiving a unicorn does not have an existing object. Its object is the non-existent unicorn. Reid says, a man cannot perceive an object that does not exist, but can conceive an object that does not exist or has never existed. To say that the sun is the object of my perception and to say that the unicorn is the object of my imagination is to use the word object in two different ways. The sun has real existence in the world. The unicorn, on the other hand, has only intentional existence in the mind of the person who imagines it. In other words, the sun exists both really and intentionally, while the imagined unicorn exists only intentionally. Reid thus accepts the object theory of intentionality, in which for a mental act to be intentional, it is necessary that it has an object. Object in this theory can include that can be thought of unicorns, dragons, golden fields, circular squares, etc., even though they have no real existence. Now, let us summarize. In this unit, we try to understand the skeptical theories of perception. We found that for the skeptics of antiquity, the real object of perception was the form of the object in the mind of the perceiver. Skeptics argue that we cannot know things in themselves. We can only know their appearances. We discovered the 10 tropes or modes as they have been revived and discussed in detail by Empiricus. These tropes include the explanation for the skeptic view that we must suspend all judgment about the real nature of the world which cannot be known. We also engaged with David Hume's stand on why we take the images of the external world presented by the senses to be the real objects. We then discussed how Reid emphasizes the existence of two kinds of ideas. Ideas for him mean the acts or operations of our minds in perceiving, remembering or imagining objects. They also include objects of those perceptions. They are not perception, remembrance or conception, but things that are said to be perceived or remembered or imagined. Now, try to solve the questions given here. What are the differences between Empiricus' skeptical theory of perception and Aquinas' notion of perception? Briefly explain how Empiricus' views differed from the views of early skeptics. How does the 10th trope differ from the rest? Why, according to David Hume, do we suppose an external universe? How would you differentiate between the existence of the sun and that of the unicorn? I can suggest some books for further studies. Skepticism and Cognitivism, a study in the foundations of knowledge by Oliver Johnson, University of California Press, 1978. The Oxford Handbook of Skepticism by John Greco, Oxford University Press, 2008. Thank you for watching this topic. See you next time. Goodbye.